The opening barrage, Hold Fast, meets the sound of collapse. The 22nd of June, 1944, Belarus. The 22nd of June, 1944. Near Orsha, Belarusian SSR. 3. In a birch-fringed command dugout, lit by a single electric bulb, Generaloberst Ernst Busch's duty officer bends over a field telephone, pencil shaking, as the distant horizon flickers white. The first thunder rolls in like a passing train. Then a second. Then a wall artillery in layered sheets so dense the earth seems to shudder in its own skin. A dispatch rider bursts in, tunic spattered with sap and dust. Feuerwalze everywhere, Herr General. Outside, beyond the dugout's timbered portal, the eastern sky goes from ink to magnesium flare. You can hear it. A rippling undertow of Katyusha rockets, their shrill descending whine sowing panic into the seams of the line. Along the forward trenches held by elements of Army Group Center 3rd Panzer Army to the north, 4th Army in the center, 9th Army down toward Bobruysk, the night has no edges. Searchlights scythe across drifting ground fog. Red tracer laces the mist. The smell is cordite and wet pine. A platoon of Lancers presses into the revetment, steel helmets beaded with dew and dust. One passes around a cigarette with trembling hands. Overhead, low and fast, an IL-2 Sturmovik knifes through the barrage, the purr of its engine buried in the storm. A grenadier mutters, "Barbarossa's birthday," and spits into the mud. An older sergeant, one of the first through Minsk in 41, just shakes his head. On the Soviet side, 4 fronts have joined the dance. The 1st Baltic to the north, the 3rd and 2nd Belarusian pressed in the middle. And farther south, the 1st Belarusian front, Rokossovsky's men poised like a spring. They have spent months preparing camouflaged assembly areas. Dummy bridges in the south to mislead, partisans blowing lines of supply, staff officers counting every rail delivered, every pontoon floated down every brown river. Now whole batteries speak at once. The barrage creeps forward as if it has its own pulse. Concealed sappers claw lanes through minefields. Before dawn fully breaks, the first tide of infantry surges, bayonets fixed, submachine guns at chest height behind rolling curtains of high explosive, at a forward command post of the German 4th Army. The duty map shows strongpoints labeled in thick grease pencil. Festerplatz Vitebsk, Festerplatz Orsha, Festerplatz Mogilev. Orders from the Wolfschanze have been unequivocal. Hold fast. No retreats, no elastic defense, no yielding of the fortress cities. Every man becomes a wall. A major leans in over the plotting table, eyes tracking the pins that mark regiments, his finger resting on a string that measures the Berezina crossings. If we pull the corps behind the Dnieper, he whispers, we can save the divisions. The corps commander doesn't look up. You heard the directive. Silence. But the map groans with consequences no rhetoric can bear. Dawn lifts. And with it, the Soviet assault divisions. T-34 85 seconds, shoulder into the mist. Infantry riding the decks, faces streaked with charcoal, the long barrels of self-propelled guns poking through hedges of willow. Somewhere to the north, the Vitebsk sector crumples. To the south, the Orsha line takes whip-crack blows from artillery concentrations that appear and vanish like ghosts. Radio nets begin to fray. A battalion at a wood line calls for 88 seconds. The battery answers once, then not at all. A forward observer's last intelligible words are swallowed by static and steam. They're behind us. God behind. Cut. In a command railcar east of Minsk, Busch leafs through an overnight intelligence digest, Soviet maskirovka in the south, deceiving even careful men when another tremor rattles the glass. Reports pile up. Penetrations near Bogushevsk. Bridges taken. German batteries silenced before they can limber up. The familiar vocabulary of crisis, Gegenangriff, Schwerpunkt, Regelstellung, feels suddenly threadbare. He lifts the receiver to Berlin, asks permission to pull back the exposed salients. The answer is the same voice he's come to dread, flat and hard as winter. Hold. Hold. but the ground itself is moving. Dugouts collapse under the concussion. Splinters of birch scythe through canvas. The air is thick with powdered earth and singed felt. An MG-42 rips an angry zipper through the morning, chasing shapes that refuse to resolve because the light is full of smoke. A Feldwebel peers over the parapet toward a smashed orchard and sees an improbable silhouette, a Soviet sapper, waving men up with a shovel, and for a heartbeat, he could swear the man is smiling. By late morning, the first reports of operational shock arrive like bad weather. Breakthrough near Vitebsk. The flank seams at Orsha beginning to tear. 9th Army's outposts around Bobruysk, drowning in a flood that hasn't crested yet. A signals officer, hands black with melted insulation, tries to stitch the net back together with reserve frequencies. The cryptic words of the night's orders, "No withdrawal without authorization," hang in the stale air like a sentence already passed. The storm does not tire. The Soviet artillery lifts and lands again. A second curtain. God's drum roll? A chaplain calls it, as he drags a wounded boy into a trench. The boy's boots scrape and leave twin arcs in the mud. In the gap between shell bursts, you can hear boots splashing the approach of something larger than divisions, larger than resolve. Out on a sand track that leads to a wooden bridge over a nameless tributary, a company runner slows and looks back. The horizon is a ragged line of fountains of dirt moving west. Inside the railcar, Bush rests his fingertips on the table's edge, as if to quiet the map itself. Around him the staff breathes in shallow, careful sips, listening to the distant thunder, as if it were a verdict pronounced syllable by syllable. On the wall, a framed photograph of 1,941 uniforms pressed, faces gaunt and exultant, has begun to tilt. Encirclements. Ignite Vitebsk, Orsha, Bobruysk. June 23-28, 1,944. The second day is worse because it brings clarity. Near Vitebsk, the fortress has become a basin into which fire pours. Regiments that spent the winter counting shells now count cartridges. Men who once boasted of the iron discipline of the Ostfront now measure distance by breaths between shell bursts. Soviet infantry rubs through the forward crust, and suddenly the German rear looks porous paths through alder scrub, lanes between rail embankments, folds in fields you forgot to watch. Armored fists slip through and open the hand behind you. A colonel in XXX Panzer Corps holds a telephone receiver to his ear and listens to the sentence that will condemn a city. Stand fast. Relief on the way. He glances at the wall map, at the blue pins that used to mean divisions and now mean illusions, and he understands that relief is a word for yesterday. Outside, half-tracks stutter over cobbles slick with plaster dust. Stugduck is parked nose to tail in alley mouths. Guns level with window frames, where rifles and anti-tank teams might flower at any second. A church bell claps once, twice, and is quiet forever. To the south at Orsha, the old Moscow road, this relic of Napoleon's dream, runs like a fuse. Soviet sappers have laid bridges in a night that never quite got dark. Now tanks pour across them in column, the T-34 seconds rocking on their suspensions, crewmen hunched into their hatches like men leaning into a headwind. German 88 seconds get a few clean penetrations that puff black through a turret roof, but the flood doesn't notice. Where the 78th Sturm Division's boundaries once had weight, there is a wet place and the smudge of a retreating smokescreen that no one ordered. The 9th Army around Bobruysk fights a separate battle that is also the same battle, one of choking swamp and willow-choked channels, where men sink to their knees in peat, just getting to the line of departure. Nebelwerfers cough in savage little choruses. Then the answering roar of Katyusha, organ pipes playing a murderous hymn. On the morning of the 26th, the last usable road west clogs, with horse teams and Opel blitzes, ambulances full of blank-staring men, and a platoon carrying a field safe, because no one has told them what matters anymore. A Luftwaffe liaison officer boots his way to a crossroads to look for the air he has been promised, and finds only the ragged contrails of Yak 9 seconds and the fading drone of Sturmovic's hunting columns. By now, encirclement is a word everyone can taste. Vitebsk's garrison is cut, ordered to hold to the last, a sentence of ritual bravery that kills as surely as shrapnel. Mogilev is pinched and turning purple on the map. West of the Berezina, an officer of the 4th Army studies a grease pencil arrow that he drew himself and wonders why it points into air. He asks for permission to break out. The answer is another monologue on duty, place, and will. He thinks of the young lieutenant whose first child was due in August and puts the receiver down very gently, as if not to wake something sleeping inside it. The Soviet plan shows its mathematics. Pry open the ends at Vitebsk and Bobruysk, hammer the middle at Orsha and Mogilev, then reach past with armor to clasp hands behind the German front. In Field Gray, men learn to hate the word operational because it means what they suffer has a shape. A battalion commander rides a bicycle when his car is lost to shrapnel, then throws the bicycle away when the road turns to wagon ruts. He tramps into a birch copse and finds a company crouched behind tree trunks, faces caked in loam, eyes rabid with hunger and permanence. "We will counterattack at dusk," he says. The men do not move for a long time. On the 27th, a storm of signal traffic washes through the air like rain through summer leaves. In Minsk, staff officers try to sort it, sleeves rolled, collars dark with sweat. The phone rings and rings. Someone says Hubei's pocket, but that was another winter, another place. This one is fresh, and it is not a pocket but a fist, closing around the ribs of Army Group Center. Under the creak of the office fan, you can hear the line, shots, breaths, that long empty hiss that means a wire is down somewhere past recovery. At Bobruysk, the vise closes. The road west becomes a column of smoke and glittering wreckage, shoe nails in soft earth, shattered soup tins and broken strap buckles. The swamp takes some of the men quietly, with a belch of peat water. The Red Army takes others loudly, with shouts and grenade blasts that echo out over the reeds. A young lieutenant clambers onto the back of a still warm Panzer IV to see. All he sees is speed. Soviet scouts on Lend-Lease Studebakers, dust rising in long, impatient corkscrews, and behind them, the dark valley of a forest road filling with armor. Evenings, you can measure defeat by sound. The old front had a grammar, quiet, flares, the far-off crump, then raids. This defeat has no grammar. It has a crescendo that never stops. It has air that never clears. It has the feeling of maps turning liquid under your fingers. Somewhere in that noise, a decision is made in Berlin. Ernst Busch will stay a little longer. Somewhere else, another decision is made without words. In the east, something fundamental has broken. On the 28th, as the last guns fire east of the Berezina and men drink swamp water from their helmets, the city names begin to change color. Vitebsk, Orsha, Bobruysk. All the places that once fed the front with track gauges and offloading ramps are now doors swinging inward. A division commander who had once chewed a cigar like a metronome holds the stump of one in his fist and doesn't notice it crumbling. Ausweichen? Nirgends mehr, he says to no one. Slip away? There's nowhere. Minsk falls the moment of realization, June 29, the 4th of July, 1944. At first light on June 29, advance guards of the Red Army find the Berezina bridges gagged with smoke. The German 4th Army, what remains of it, has its back to the water and its face to a ring that tightens with each passing hour. A captain who fought in Smolensk once swore he would never see another catastrophe. Now he stands on a riverbank with a field telephone clamped to his head and listens to voices crumbling into static. He watches engineers blow a span in a bloom of black dust and twisted timber, then watches a Soviet pontoon train slide into the gap as neatly as a key into a lock. Minsk becomes an antechamber of defeat. On July 2, the city is full of ghosts, headquarters that have already moved, Units that exist only as lists, staff cars moving like thoughts that cannot settle, the loudspeakers that once promised calm now wheeze and spit before lapsing into dead air. Columns of civilians drag belongings toward the west. Wehrmacht stragglers thread among them, hunched under packs lashed with telephone wire, blank-eyed, mouths stained with bread crust and dirt. A pair of MG teams sets up on a traffic circle as if it were 1941 again, and they were waiting for T26 seconds. Now a wave of T34 85 seconds slides around the circle as if working a clock face, and the MG's tracers just bounce like sparks off an anvil. On July 3, Minsk is taken. The way it happens reveals the scale of the collapse more than the drama of the street fighting. Soviet spearheads arrive from opposite sides, link, and pass through. Strong points are bypassed and then pinched. Rear guards are overrun by mobile groups that do not pause at the city's edge. A German lieutenant emerges from a cellar with a white rag at his bayonet, only to find that no one is interested. The line has already leapt beyond the place where his gesture would matter. A field howitzer fires its last round and then sits, tongue out, while its crew stares at their hands. Behind Minsk, the pocket congeals into a vast corral of misery. Thousands, tens of thousands of prisoners. Columns move west under guard, dust rising from their boots in pale veils. Some carry wounded, some carry nothing. A boy whose face has the translucent look of the very young and the very old drags a field radio set with the obstinacy of a dream. The guards, many of them teenagers too, watch with the baffled intensity of the victorious who have not yet understood what the victory means. In the wrecked headquarters that night, a senior staff officer writes in a small green notebook, "It is not the Vistula yet, but the mind must go there." He draws a line along the Niemen and taps the Neru crossings with the pencil's worn rubber. The word hold appears again not as instruction this time, but as a question. Hold what? With whom? A week after the blow fell, the command changes. Walter Model arrives at the front like a tourniquet short, hard-eyed, speaking in sentences that slice. The field marshal Hitler calls his fireman, steps into a fire that has no edges. He orders lines drawn on the Nemen, on the Shara, on the Bug, lines on a map that is tired of lines. He asks after divisions and is given numbers that add up to ghosts. He orders Kampfgruppen formed around batteries that are down to 4 shells, a tube, and companies with no officers left to sign the orders. He pulls staff from their chairs and sends them to the bridges. He shouts, he believes in friction and will. And even Model understands. In a shuttered room he meets with a handful of army and corps commanders' faces grimed, uniforms bleeding color at the edges from sweat and dust. They talk in short bursts, as men do when data is a kind of pain. One of them, a quiet general, who still say, Russia, with an ache of 1,941 inches, his voice rubs his fingertips together and says, "We are not moving reserves. We are reorganizing surrenders." The room does not breathe for a moment. The scale is what breaks belief. German losses in the wreckage of Army Group Center climb above 300,000 dead, wounded, missing, captured, a set of numbers that refuses to be carried by any single page of any single ledger. One staff captain tries to keep a current total in a right margin and gives up. In the parks of towns whose names the mapmakers have trouble keeping up with, stacked rifles grow in thickets like an iron crop. In a schoolyard, a German Major Tier's unit flashes from tunics with a knife and tosses them into a bucket. The pile looks like a handful of autumn leaves. Somewhere west of Minsk, a colonel crouches in a drainage ditch under a sky full of agitated ground attack aircraft and forces himself to stare east. Not at the field, not at the ditch, not at the map in his pocket, but at the idea of what lies beyond this line of birches and smoke. He has spent 3 years treating the East as an inexhaustible geometry of space and time to be traded for advantage. Now he feels the absence of that geometry like a missing limb. "When das hier so bleibt," he whispers, "if this stays like this, the war in the East, is decided. Night comes hot and close. The horizon glows with the heat lightning of cities nobody will hold by morning. On a roadside altar, a votive flickers and goes dark in the backwash of a passing truck. In the hum behind the mind's noise, reality lodges. The Reich has lost its eastern shield. The space that once absorbed every blow is gone. The Red Army will keep walking until the sea, unless someone can invent divisions out of air. To the Vistula aftermath and the irreversible verdict. July-August 1944. In July's last week, pursuit acquires the lazy inevitability of a river in flood. Soviet cavalry mechanized groups push west in long, rolling lines, dust hanging over them like banners. Tank brigades feel for crossings as if for pulses at the wrist of the land. Grodno, Lida, Baranovichi, names that had grown familiar to German staff, in the comfortless way that scabs do slip, one by one, out of the daily reports into the past tense. The Niemen is reached. The crossings are forced or flanked. Beyond that, the land opens toward the Vistula, and with it, the Polish plain. Wherever Model stands still long enough to draw breath, he summons a defense out of nothing. Behind farm hedges and in the shallow folds of glacial hills, he nails together hedgehog positions with squads that are really half squads and batteries that are 4 guns and a prayer. He moves the remnants of divisions like chessmen with chipped paint, never minding that the board itself keeps changing shape beneath his hands. He sees a line at the Neru, a line near Siedlce, a line at the Bug. He steadies hands, barks orders, coaxes officers to stand upright in a wind that makes men stoop. He buys days, but even days are an admission now. At the Vistula, on its brown summer water, Soviet bridgeheads bloom like dark flowers. Magnuszew, Puławy, names that will become spells of doom in German conference rooms. Across from Warsaw, Rokossovsky's first Belarusian front looks at the city with the eyes of a man who has run a long way and knows there is farther yet to go. Listen on a night in late July, and you can hear the river talkpilings creak, boats slap, the quiet metal sounds of engineers doing their patient, exact work. On the German side, sentries fidget and slap mosquitoes, and try not to imagine the sudden thrash of motors and the massive amphibious thrust that will spill over their bank at dawn. In Berlin, maps multiply. The Reich Chancellery has it set, the OKH another, the OKW a third. None can square the circle of losses. After the 20 July plot, Heinz Guderian moves into the Chief of Staff's chair and stares at figures that seem to insult arithmetic, formations that no longer exist listed as present, divisions that are shadows expected to stand like stone. He argues for ruthlessness and logic, shorter lines, the abandonment of fortress fixations, the release of static divisions that are static only because they have no trucks left. In meetings, the word political hisses like steam. At forward corps posts, the talk is plainer. The East is bleeding into the West, says a colonel who has been awake for 70 hours. We are building dams out of sand. At a field kitchen, a private who has lost his spectacles stirs thin soup with a stick and says to no one, "They'll be at the odor before we find our glasses." And then he laughs. Because what else is there to do? The markers are everywhere if you know where to look. Captured depots that once sustained an army group now feed a front. Prisoners whose numbers would stalk a small city march past with their belts pulled tight and their cheeks hollow. German divisions are redesignated in haste. The same numbers stitched onto new cloth as if the digits themselves could deflect fate. Replacements boys with down still on their cheeks. Men recalled from desk jobs. Convalescents are plugged into formations that no longer have the veterans who could have taught them how to live through Thursday. Armor is husbanded like jewelry. Fuel is counted in hours. And yet, inside the defeat, there is a certain clarity. A major on Model's staff writes to his wife and does not send the letter because there is no post. It is not only that we have retreated far. It is that we have retreated into a shape from which one cannot attack. The enemy has mass. He has factories awake day and night. He has a road of supply behind him that we cannot cut because we no longer have the knife. He folds the letter and puts it in his map case anyway, as if paper could anchor a thought in a world of wind. At the Vistula, German officers stand on bluffs and look west at sunset because they cannot bear to look east. The river turns copper, then iron, then black. Behind them, a field telephone rings and rings. In front of them, beyond the dark ribbon of water, engines cough and a night ferry scuffs into a reed bed. The officers listen to frogs and the rattle of enamel mess tins and the slurp of mud at the river's edge and think in the elemental terms men use when history condenses: water, wood, iron, time. By August's first week, the verdict has written itself across hundreds of kilometers of torn country. Army Group Center, as it existed in June, is gone. In its place is a rind of battered units, a web of stopgaps, a field marshal with a genius for defense holding a thread too thin for the weight hung on it. The Red Army stands on the Vistula. In places it stands across it. The distance from this river to Berlin can be measured in railway timetables and bridge loads and calendar squares, already marked with red pencil. Sometime past midnight, in a farmhouse commandeered for a staff billet, two colonels talk over a candle that drips on a saucer. One looks at a penciled sketch of the front and says, almost gently, "Es ist vorbei nicht heute, nicht morgen, aber I am Osten ist es vorbei." It is over, not today, not tomorrow, but in the east it is over. No one contradicts him, because the candle has just guttered and gone out, and in the sudden darkness both men hear, as if very close, the broad, contented breath of a river that has decided its own course to the sea.